Thank you all for standing by and welcome to our webinar entitled Using Community Engagement to Study Stormwater Infrastructure Resiliency Against Climate Change. This webinar series called Freshwater Science will highlight Ohio Sea Grant and partnering scientists every month. Every quarter is a different focus, from human health and fish farming to harmful algal blooms and human decision-making, bringing applied research to the public on issues that affect our Lake Erie communities. I am Jill Gentis-Banicki from Ohio Sea Grant and Stone Laboratory, and joining me today is Dr. Suresh Sharma from Youngstown State University. Dr. Sharma is an associate professor in civil and environmental engineering within Youngstown State. Dr. Sharma is interested in complex hydraulic and water quality modeling using various types of data-driven, conceptual, physical-based, and distributed and semi-distributed watershed modeling in the context of climate change and variability. We're delighted to have Dr. Sharma here to talk about his research. Before we do that, just a few things about the webinar itself. During our presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. Afterwards, at around 12:25-ish, I'll conduct a question and answer session. If you'd like to ask a question during his presentation, please feel free to pull up the chat feature anytime during his talk, and I will collect and pose out your questions to Dr. Sharma at the end of his presentation. As a reminder, this webinar has auto captioning and is being recorded to be posted onto our website for later viewing. Also, we will post a webinar survey in the chat feature toward the end of the half an hour. Please take a few minutes after the webinar to fill out that survey. It always helps us continue to bring you better webinars. So without any further delay, I'd like to introduce Dr. Sharma presenting Using Community Engagement to Study Stormwater Infrastructure Resiliency Against Climate Change. Dr. Sharma.
Thank you, Jill, for a nice introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. As Jill mentioned, I am an associate professor. I'm an associate professor at Youngstown State University. My title has been a little bit changed, but more or less it's same. Today I'm going to present stakeholder participations in green infrastructure implementation for resilient stormwater management against climate change in town of Willoughby. This is my generic, presentation overview. I'll be talking about some background information, objective, the study area description, brief methodology, results, and discussion. Let me start with some hydrologic processes in urbanized catchment. This is the slide I took from the US EPA. If you see at the left panels, when the ground surface is natural, you have almost like 50% water is getting infiltrated, 40% is evapotranspiration, and only the 10% is runoff. And in the right panel, we can see the same things when it is converted into the urbanized area. The infiltration is reduced to approximately 15% altogether, and significant part will be runoff, like 55% runoff, and evapotranspiration will also be decreased. So this is the condition and situation due to the urbanization and the land use change. Now, if you look at the climate history or historical climate patterns within the United States and especially in the Midwest regions, left panel indicates the annual temperature change, how the temperature has been changed over the decades. And in the right panel, you can see that especially this 99th percentile precipitations over the last several decades from 1958 to 2016, there has been a significant increase in precipitation pattern. That's a 42% it comes around within the Ohio and Great Lake regions. So let's look at this a little bit more in details about the historical patterns, how the global climate has its warmings over the last several decades and these patterns. You can see that the last decade, 2010 to 2020, is the warmest periods in last 100,000 years, 125,000 years. And I'm surprised that they have the data lasting for so many, centuries back. And in the right panel, it indicates the greenhouse gas emissions from the various human activities because of the anthropogenic influence, carbon dioxide, fossil fuels, even non-carbon dioxide emissions and land use change. And these are the reasons that increased temperatures and global warming. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC finding, as I suggested that, as I reported earlier, that 2010 to 2020 was the hottest decade in 125,000 years. And if we look at the right panels, this indicates the potential climate change impact and the potential trajectory of the greenhouse gas emissions and the path depending upon the, how the economic development takes place in the next few decades, in the next centuries, or how this, competition among the, developed countries and what kind of mitigating measures will be adopted. And depending upon those, there are some possible scenario of very high emission versus very low emissions. Now, what is the consequences of all these events? Eventually, when the land use is changing, climate is changing, because of this urbanizations, already the peak runoff is increasing. And on the other hand, the extreme precipitation, especially the high precipitation or intensity of the precipitation is increasing, accelerating. So the conventional drainage system that has been designed based on the historical precipitation patterns are not being able to hold the runoff. And the runoff is being increased significantly due to the two effects. One is land use change, urbanization, another is climate change. Now, what are the solution? What could be the potential solution for that? One of the, green infrastructure is, sometimes people call it a low impact development as well. And it is a very broad terms. I'm using all this, the terminology just based on the PC-SWIM models. There are just 8, but green infrastructure can cover many more than what I have listed here. Some are bioretention cells, rain garden, green roof, infiltration trench, permeable pavement system, rain barrel, rooftop disconnection, vegetative swell. These are some of the green infrastructure that could be potentially used to some extent, not all the extent, but to some extent to mitigate the increased runoff. Now, how do we address these issues? One of the issues is, we can conduct the research, publish the articles, present in the scientific meetings, but how can we take that information to the ground? How can we educate the community? And also, there are a number of things involved at the policy levels. For example, we may say that this kind of green infrastructure are effective to reduce or to mitigate the runoff. But in order to implement that, at the community levels, people must have some level of motivation. There should be some kind of incentive mechanisms, or maybe some subsidy or taxation or some policy level implications just to encourage the community. Otherwise, why should I bother, to put the rain garden in my house? So that's why we thought that it is very important to engage the community, not only community, but also the engineers, planners, decision makers, mayors who are working in the policy level. So we started with the stakeholder engagements. So now with that basis, my student had defined the 4 objectives. One is a stakeholder collaboration for GI identifications, because we may say that this green infrastructure is more effective, but the community might have some reluctance to use that one. And then we wanted to evaluate the efficacy of those green infrastructures, which was prioritized or which was preferred by the community. And then integrate this climate change data, CMIP5, and latest climate data, CMIP6, to evaluate the efficacy of green infrastructure, to mitigate runoff, and at the end to educate the community. Now, this is the study area. We conducted this study in town of Willoughby. The area is approximately 47 square mile. The elevation ranges from 174 to 243 meters. It's pretty, coastal areas near to the Lake Erie. We conducted a series of meetings with a representative from, including technical expert, engineers, planners, decision makers. We have a focused group discussions. We develop the questionnaires. We prioritize the GI solution based on their suggestions. Those are the questionnaires that we listed. I'm not going to go much in details, how they were familiar with the GI concept and its benefit, what were the challenges related to urban flooding, what was the effectiveness of GI solution in urban flooding challenges, beneficial area, their willingness to explore potential outcome, what sort of support they might need, and what kind of comment and suggestion they would like to share. We developed several questionnaires and then went to the community. And we use the PCSWIM models, which is actually a commercial version of stormwater management model. We delineated the watershed into different subcatchment and different junctions. You can see it in the right side, the land use map and the town of the Willoughby. And we actually calibrated and validated the model based on using the precipitation data. We used the HiFi data. 4 or 5 stations, there were a depth data collected by the HiFi company, and we evaluated models using some statistical measures. Based on our discussion with the community, they preferred the rain garden, and also this recommended the permeable pavements, because there are a number of issues associated with that. When we communicated with those participants, they found that they shared their opinion that this LID or green infrastructure are helpful for mitigating runoff, but they found a number of issues, including the maintenance issue in the long runs, how we can maintain this green infrastructure and so forth. So that's why they recommended the rain garden and permeable pavements. And infiltration trench was not that much recommended, partially because of the soil patterns in that regions. So we figured out the deployment strategy. That means we implemented the rain gardens in the residential area, each house, and we also applied at the 20% houses used rain garden, 40% houses use rain garden, or 60, 80, 100, because there is very less likely that every householder will use the rain garden. So we wanted to investigate a little bit in details, what is the implementation level versus what is the runoff reduction. Similarly, their recommendation, the community recommended the permeable pavements only in the commercial parking lot. So we have not used in the every householders. And then we figured out those areas and we applied in the models, PCSWIM models. As I mentioned earlier, the implementation level was 20 to 100% at the 20% increment. And we analyzed for each design storms of 2 year, 5 year to eventually 100 years for 24-hour rainfall period. But later for the climate change, we analyze even for 6 hours. We utilized the Hopkins International Airport, Cleveland, because it offered a long-term historical climate data without any interruptions. We had a nearby station, but we did not rely so much because there were some missing data. We made the bias corrections, extreme precipitation we calculated. We calculated the 6-hour and 24-hour precipitation for different various return periods. We analyzed for the baseline period, near future, we define as a 2020 to 2059 as a near future, and 2060 to 2099 as a far future. Just to give you some overview of, what are these representative concentration pathway. This is the CMIP5 model scenarios. We were using just RCP 8.5 from the CMIP5, and we use all the scenarios from the CMIP6. So RCP 8.5 is the greenhouse gas emissions, which assumes that it will continue to rise throughout the 21st century without significant mitigation efforts, whereas 2.6 is low greenhouse gas emissions, and others are in between. And again, as I said, that we use CMIP6 also. There are some reason for that one, because CMIP5, we had a regional climate model data downscale with a 50 by 50 kilometer resolution. So we wanted to investigate that one first. And the second thing is that CMIP6 are the latest climate data suggested by IPCC. It has some more other scenario like SSP 126 to SSP 585. They are called as a shared socioeconomic path. So we uses that one. Again, I might quickly go over this one. What are these? SSP 1 to 6 is sustainability. That means it is a focus on a strong environmental policy, whereas the SSC 585 is a rapid economic development and heavy reliance on the fossil fuel. So we don't know which trajectory will go in the futures. So it could be anywhere in between. So we just wanted to investigate what if we took a strong environmental policy versus middle of the road, or maybe when high regional competitions and high greenhouse gas emission because of the limited international cooperations and so forth. So we analyze all these, and these are the models. I'm not going to discuss much in detail about these. These are from CMIP5 data, and these are from CMIP6. There are three, four models for the CMIP6 and number of scenarios involved. And we calibrated and validated the model. This Nash-Sutcliffe efficiency, we call it the goodness of fit, and the coefficient of determination R-squared. The performance of the model was pretty good, which were evaluated in terms of NSE and R-square. The model was calibrated for a certain period, validated for some periods. You can see from the visual inspection how the model was performing well in different stations, and we're pretty much satisfied with the performance of the model for the PC swim models using the HiFi data. And then we actually started analyzing. Give me a second. This slide is self-disturbing me. Yeah. So this is the runoff reduction using the permeable pavement. We actually developed various different models in a different areas, because there were three cities: city of Willoughby, city of Eastlake, city of Mentors. So we actually analyze in a various scales of taking different subcatchments. So this analysis was in a 62 subcatchment. The area varies from very, very small area to the larger areas as high as 8.76 square kilometers. This is actually in a smaller scale model. There are a couple of things that we wanted to I wanted to discuss here from this analysis is that, if you look at the 2-year return period versus 100-year return period, you have a little bit better correlation in 100-year return period. It is pretty much convincing for me, because when you go to the 2-year rainfalls, the hydrologic budget that you calculate is probably more accurate when you take a larger rainfall events. Otherwise, in a 2-year rainfall, when a rainfall amount is very small, there are significant amount of losses, and the hydraulic budget that we calculated is not that much exact and accurate. So there is a better correlation in the 100-year rainfall. And then another thing that we wanted to highlight, this percentage LID is talking about percentage of permeable pavement actually. And bear with me, I should have written as a percentage of permeable pavement. So this correlation tends to get flatter, after it goes to 6 to 7% of the permeable pavement. And if you look at here, there are cases where there is a 25-30% reduction as well. And then if there is a percentage of LID is very small, the reduction is less. So it depends, and we wanted to develop this kind of correlations because it can be transferred. This kind of a relationship could be transferred or applied in another region as well, So we wanted to see how much percentage of permeable pavement versus how much of peak reductions or total reduction in runoff. So this is same as in a using a permeable pavement, but we use the different subcatchment of different area, 0.17 square kilometer to 2.19 square kilometers. The GI, it is said, is confusing. GI we are talking about here also permeable pavement. The implementation label that came actually, it's not that we applied, it came like 0.15 to 36%, because we wanted to apply only in a commercial area, because that was suggested by our partners, And then also we apply the runoff reduction in from 0.17 square kilometer to 0.19 square kilometers area of the subcatchment. There were 46 subcatchment. Implementation level came 0.15% to 36%. And then you can see that there are certain cases where the reduction go as high as 25 to 30%, but the mean reductions, if you look at here, is somewhere around the 10%. And again, this is same things for the permeable pavements, but I was trying to see some things in 100% implementation level. The earlier was 22%, 40%, 80% implementation level. That means there is no guarantee that all the parking lot of the commercial area they will use the permeable pavement or permeability as well. So that's why we wanted to see whether the 100% area of the commercial area of the parking lot could be converted into permeable pavement or 20% area only. What interesting thing that we found out is that regardless of the rainfall patterns, 2 year to 100 years, this line are pretty much flat, or the same percentage, same type of the reduction was there. And then the lower panel suggests the percentage of average peak reduction, and it go as high as 15 to 20%, depending upon the what level of implementation that we were doing. Now we just analyze again using the rain gardens. So this is interesting to report that rain garden, when you were using in a 2-year return period, the correlation was really poor. But when we went to the 100-year return period, the correlation was as high as 0.91. So that means you can potentially transfer this kind of understanding and relationships to another watershed area also. LID is just here. We are talking about a rain garden. I should have used a rain garden instead of LID here. And our analysis came as high as 4 to 5 to 6% of the rain garden, because rain garden is implemented one house, and maybe that is the size of 150 feet by 150 feet or so forth. And then when you convert this kind of permeability in the total catchment size of the house, it's not going to be more than 5-6%. But what is interesting to report that there are cases where the reduction go as high as 20 to 25% in a particular cases, if the LID percentage is coming a little higher in compared to the the area of the catchment. So these are the different level of implementation: 60%, 80%, 100% implementations, and I'm not going to go much in detail about that. Rain garden is not showing that much in reduction in the peak. There are cases like just 3 to 4, 5%. Even 100% implementation of rain garden has not come into that much effective if we look at this data. And then we also analyzed the climate models, rainfall data, and this is just a comparison of how these different climate scenarios and the NOAA comparisons of various return periods. As I mentioned earlier, SSP 126, SSP 126 near future, far future, these are all the climate models scenarios, and the NOAA historical climate data from the NOAA Atlas 14 were also available. And from here also, from this analysis also, we are pretty confident that our climate data that we processed are pretty much close to the historical pattern, at least, because it's not too far from the what we were what was in the NOAA Atlas 14. Again, this is the baseline scenario versus climate models. We used all these different climate models, including CMIP5 of RCP 8.5 to SSP 8585, from near future to far futures. You can see that there is a percentage increase in the runoff. Obviously 100-year increase is really high. This is without using any kind of green infrastructures, because we wanted to investigate at first that how this climate data will potentially would increase the runoff in that catchment. And then in the next step, we would like to experiment with all this rain garden and permeable pavement, and if there is some kind of potential reductions in the runoff by using such kind of in green infrastructure. Again, this is the near future and far futures. For the 2-year, 100 years, a little bit more. Far future also, and we applied the permeable pavement as I mentioned earlier. So let me see the times. I don't have much time, it looks like, so I just wanted to wrap up a little quickly. Permeable pavements, if we look at the SSP 5126 near future and far futures, it works. It will reduce the runoff to the original to the baseline situation. But if you go back to the SSP 585 far future and near future, it is not that much effective. Similarly, this is again the climate model. Yeah, this is permeable pavement in a climate model versus baseline. Looks like it is the same thing. And this is rain garden in a climate model versus baseline. Rain garden is only effective for the futures only 2-year return period for SSP 1 to 6 near future and far future. As I said that, there are different climate scenario. If you go to the worst condition of climate scenario, this rain garden is not going to be effective to combat the climate change. But essentially, to some extent, the permeable pavement is capable to reduce the runoff to the baseline situations for the effective, yeah. And then this is the case of rain garden in climate model versus baseline, and we didn't see any kind of effect here. So I just want to go to the conclusions. Let me read aloud. Permeable pavement demonstrated notable reduction in total runoff, with peak runoff reduction ranging from 4% to 19% for a 2-year storm event and 3 to 15% for a 100-year storm event for various catchment. Despite the 100% implementation across residential area, rain garden exhibited limited effectiveness. Expanding the application of GI, including permeable pavement and rain garden, beyond the current boundaries, because we implemented the permeable pavement only in the parking area as of the commercial areas. So if we expand a little bit in different areas, there is a potentially we can get the potential benefit. So this is again the summary. I don't want to go much in detail for the interest of the time. What I would say that there are certain scenarios which could be, if the climate change trajectory could take those kind of scenarios, yes, permeable pavement could be very, very helpful to mitigate the, climate change impact in the future, to mitigate the runoff. But if it goes to the very worst case scenario like SSP 585 or RCP 8.5, then even the permeable pavement may not be able to do that. But also I need to confess that we did not apply permeable pavement in the residential area. It was the applications in the only commercial area. If you apply in a residential area, most likely it will be helpful. So I would like to acknowledge the different peoples. One thing I would like to, I'm sorry for that, because I use the students' thesis presentation. She's going to make a presentation after 1 hour, and I just use her acknowledgement. But anyway, regardless the case, the YUC grant would like to acknowledge for the grant support, Kelly from the Seagreen River Watershed Partners and different peoples. And I would like to conclude my presentations, and I would be more than glad to take any questions.
All right. We got several questions. The first question we had was, first, people were interested in how you and your student engaged with the community, with the village, and I'm sorry, which village was that? How you got them engaged, how that community was engaged with you, for, say, a community who is interested in implementing something like this.
Yeah, that's a very good question. What we did, we actually did not go to the community level at this point of time. We had a partner, Seagreen River Watershed Partners. They're working extensively in the Lake County areas. We communicated with the city of Mentor, city of Eastlake, and city of Willoughby. Those are the 3 major cities in the Willoughby County, Willoughby City, Hawkesbury watersheds. And one of the reasons that we communicated with them is that they were interested to implement this kind of green infrastructure. They were thinking about the planning, and then they were also analyzing and developing PCC model in the past for the potential reduction of the runoff. So we communicated with those peoples, and in the first round of the discussions, we talked with the city engineers, mayors, other planners and other staffs, and so forth. And we did not go to at the community and the village level to take their feedback. But once we have these results, we'll be going to share these results to those peoples. And then from that point, maybe I'll communicate with the Seagreen River Watershed Partners and how we can take this information to the grassroots level.
All right. Another question that we had was dealing with, and I'm not sure if this would be specifically to the models or general data, but they were asking whether or not the increased rain was measured by the amount or the intensity or both?
Actually, it is both the rainfall amount and also the intensity. Yes, those are model predicted rainfall data. And we calculated in the intensity. First, we calculate the rainfall depth, and then we calculated the rainfall intensity. I did not make a presentation, it's a whole part. We actually developed the intensity, frequency, duration curve for the future. So that means we have an intensity, rainfall intensity for the future for different return periods, from 2-year to 100-year return periods for the different time duration from 1 hour to 24 hours. And we use those data. I did not make a presentations, this part in this webinar, and using those climate data, future climate data, we use in our model.
All right. We had one participant ask whether or not you could possibly show that graphic at the beginning of your presentation that showed the observed change in heavy precipitation. I did want to mention to everyone that Dr. Sharma is going to, if you would like to email him, and I will send you all his email address. If you want to email him to ask for his slides, you are more than welcome after his student defends in an hour.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
if you are interested in his slides, I will send his email address and you can email him.
So is this I think it looks
No,
like.
I think it was early on that showed, and this might have
This one.
been, this
This
might be
one.
the IPCC's data.
This
Oh,
is the actually
oh,
observed historical data
okay.
of how the
Yep, this is it.
precipitation is increasing. Maybe this one.
All right. I think that is it. So that's perfect. Let me see. And sorry, I'm like looking if there were several questions that were asked and you answered them in your presentation. So I am just looking to see what questions we have not gotten to yet. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to put those in the chat.
Yeah, there is a one questions it was asked to me. Is that okay if I read aloud?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, there is what is the definition of a permeable pavement in these models? What we are doing here is, we allow to infiltrate the, rainfalls and reduce the runoff. So to the stormwater management models, it has some kind of mechanisms to define those kind of permeability in the pavement structures. So we use that one, and then we define 20% permeability. That means 20% rainfall potentially will infiltrate, or 40% permeability means 40% rainfall will infiltrate. So like that, we just allowed those kind of permeability in the models, and then analyzed in the PC stream. I hope it helps.
Can you talk a little bit about how community engagement utilized how community engagement was utilized in this process? And you talked a little bit about this earlier. Can you talk a little more about it?
Yeah, this is a very good question. And actually, I did not use the word community later on. I used the word stakeholder because originally, we're thinking to go a little bit more in details at the community levels. But my partner, this project is funded by Ohio Sea Grant, and my partner, Sea Green River Watershed Partners, are doing some intensive outreach, and they're going to share these informations to the community and the local levels in a different ways. They are going to share these informations to the board of members, and they are going to make presentations to different groups and different teams. And also they are going to share these informations to the cities, engineers and planners, and stormwater management, and the different other partners and other, organization. So essentially, I mean, I would say that stakeholder engagement was probably an appropriate word because we did not go to the, community labels directly so far. We have not gone to the community levels so far for identifying the, their preferred green infrastructure. But once we have a findings, clear findings, which we have now, and then slowly we will take that information to the grassroots levels to disseminate that information in different ways.
All right. Another question that we got was, do permeable pavement result over the long term with unstable structures under the pavement due to washout of substrate?
Mm. Well, that is another thing that we need to ponder. I mean, if some things unstable inside, like we definitely the permeability will allow to infiltrate, and if the, if the already some kind of, basement are floodings, and and there are number of issues like that people are reporting. Yes, such kind of engineering structures has to be studied separately. I with this study looked from the perspective of how this permeable pavement could mitigate the runoff, but our study has not investigated further that how many houses were there, and because whenever there is a heavy rainfall and so forth, their basement is flooding, and if you are still allowed to make more rainfalls, under the, undergrounds, then it might create another problems. That kind of study we have not done. So I will pass this question. So yes, there might be a situation that we have to study separately for those kind of things.
All right. Another question that we got, is, do you ask about stakeholder willingness to pay? And they're just mentioning that they may be interested, but may find the installation and maintenance costly.
That is very, very true. This is a very good question. Yes, we spoke with them, and one of the major concerns and one of the major issues in the discussion was all these green infrastructure are good and they are very helpful, to some extent, but the maintenance of an installation of these things are a little bit challenging. So that's why, there was some level of reluctance, I would say that, at the, people's to use that. But one of the reasons that we wanted to engage the, decision makers like mayors and other people, other administrators, is that, whether there will be some level of subsidy or some level of, incentives for the people who want to do that. Because, I mean, why should I use the permeable pavement in my, in my lot if it is not going to be affect me significantly? Because even if there is a flooding, it's going to flood in the downstream, not in my house. So that kind of tendency will be there. So yes, that was a very serious concerns and discussions, maintenance issues. One of the very serious concerns during the discussion was installation and maintenance cost. But we are not clear about that, whether the cities or the stakeholder are willing to adjust those or address those concerns.
All right. Another question was, what was the percentage of existing impervious surfaces in the watershed that you used to produce your model?
This is a very good question. Percentage of existing, I don't remember on top of my head. I should have brought my student as well. She's going to make a presentation after half an hour, so I will ask her these questions. So I don't remember exactly on top of my head. We calculated the impervious area using the NLCD and other land use areas and informations that were available, but I don't exactly, and the imperviousness was varying from city to city, and there were 3 major cities. So I don't really remember.
Well, and this participant can email you
Exactly.
directly
Please feel free
and
to
get that
email me.
information after you pose that out to your student in half an hour.
Exactly. Exactly.
The last question, and then we will let you go so you can go to that defense. Could you, you had mentioned that there's still a little bit more work to be done on the data itself.
Mhm.
Do you feel, a couple people are asking when they would potentially see all the results of this research? Do you have a time frame yet?
Yes, we do. We do. Maybe within a 2 month or within a 1 or 2 month, they will have a full access to the thesis, a master's thesis. And then after that, this research will be submitted as a journal articles, and it might take some time to come as, to appear in a journals, little longer time. But the dissertations, thesis will be available pretty soon. So maximum 1 and 2 months.
All right, perfect, perfect. Well, so anyone interested in that will be able to reach out to you directly.
Exactly. So they can email me, and I would be more than willing to share some more information if I could not answer some of the questions here. So
All
feel
right.
free to reach out to me to my email address.
All right, and I will send that email address to everyone in an email with the recording here, probably within the next hour or two. Well, I think those were the majority, if not all, of the questions that still needed to be answered. So thank you for your willingness to answer all of these. Also, just want to thank, in general, everyone for attending. Thank you again, Dr. Sharma, for your willingness to talk with us today about your research. This was really an really interesting topic. I did also want to remind everyone that our survey URL for this webinar is in the chat feature, so please take a few minutes to fill that out. This webinar series is sponsored by Ohio Sea Grant and will continue in April with Dr. Bullerjean, Dr. Sterner, and Dr. Miller talking about an approach to compare how patterns of nitrogen and phosphorus affect algal blooms and how those are influenced by temperature and climate. The registration link is in the chat. Thank you again, Dr. Sharma. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk about your research. Thank you to all the participants on the webinar. We hope this was beneficial and hope you'll join us again in an upcoming webinar. Thank you and have a great afternoon. Thank you again, Dr. Sharma.
Thank you, Jill, for coordinating all this, and thanks all the participants for joining and listening to my presentation. So if you have any further questions or PowerPoint, or if you need some more information, please reach out to me. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and see you next time sometime.
Thank you again, Dr. Sharma.
Bye-bye.
Bye.